filmmaker Rodney Ascher gathers together theories, speculations and rumours about what The Shining actually means in his engrossing documentary Room 237. I posed this question and many others to Rodney and producer Tim Kirk ahead of the film's UK release on October 26th.
Anything you say, Lloyd. Anything you say.
Rodney and Tim, welcome to the London Film Festival. The documentary starts in London, doesn't it?
Yeah, actually, in fact, the film starts with Bill Blakemore talking about seeing it in Leicester Square, and that's where we're screening tomorrow.
I went in to see this movie in Leicester Square, a movie theater right near Leicester Square in London, and I remember it quite clearly. I can even remember the seats we were sitting in. If I went back to the theater, I could point them to you. Sort of near the back and over to the left.
Will you be sitting in the very same seats?
Back and to the left.
Of course. So obviously, The Shining is much more than a horror film, and for those who don't already know, this film is about the theories of what The Shining is actually about or could be about. And I'm wondering, do you have a favourite theory?
Well, I can't pick just one. Although I've kind of become aware of sort of a new theory that's kind of a more generalized, unified theory of The Shining, something I was talking with Bill Blakemore about just the other day after a screening of 237, which is that if The Shining is supposed to be a horror movie, which is supposed to scare you, what better way to create that effect than with references to, historical atrocities and frightening myths and Freudian dramas and government cover-ups and subliminal techniques.
So it's the ultimate horror film in that way because it brings all those things?
Because it contains every horror every other horror in the world.
That's wonderful.
It's a movie about how the past impinges. That's what ghosts are. That's what those skittery voices in the opening shot that are following are about.
I sort of relate to Julie Kearns talks about the impossible geography of the Overlook, and I relate to that in the sense that especially in making Room 237, at times I felt like we were spending so much time in the Overlook, like walking around and looking at details and what's on the walls and what are the boxes in the pantry and so forth, and the fact that it actually doesn't work geographically. You could turn a corner, it wouldn't be where it would be. Just works for me as sort of that bad dream quality you have where nothing's where it really should be. And I think of The Shining in many ways as just a very powerful bad dream.
Well, and it's such a great visual metaphor for a puzzle that you can never quite solve.
Right, which is the what Room 237 addresses.
I'm wondering, how many times have you both seen The Shining? Forget research for this document, just in general.
Well, you mean from beginning to end at normal speed?
Beginning to end. Well, we'll get to other versions of it.
16, 17?
I would think, about the same. I must have seen it at least 12 times in college, and I'd seen it a few times before that, and then since. So yeah, it's got to at least be 15.
But yeah, all these theories. Did you pick out any of these when you were watching it as fans, or was it only after you trawled the internet?
It only came during the research, because when I read about them afterwards, part of the exercise of Room 237 was to get our heads around these theories. Like we came across the idea that that The Shining has a lot to say about the genocide of the Native Americans. I was like, well, how does that work? Besides, the burial ground and some of the motif, I don't quite get it. So we talked to Bill Blakemore as a way to understand.
And I think my visual imagination looked at that Calumet baking powder can, the one right behind Halloran's head when he's talking to Danny. I knew what Calumet meant. It meant peace pipe. And I thought to myself, peace pipe, Indians. Oh my goodness, they're all over the place in that movie.
Loser has to keep America clean.
said to my friends, that movie was about the genocide of the American Indians. And they said, what are you talking about? And I started explaining it, because I'd noticed the Calumet baking soda can. The first time we see one, it's a single baking powder can straight on, and you can see the whole word Calumet. So there's no duplicity, like the little girls represent later. This is an honest treaty, an honest peace pipe between them. The other time we see the Calumet baking powder cans is when they're very carefully placed behind Jack Nicholson's head when he's talking to Grady.
Need to rub it in, Mr. Grady.
It's interesting that the film The Shining has changed a great deal for me, my understanding of it, and not so much through the theories, these other theories that we explore in Room 237, but it just changes in my own life. I remember when I was first really obsessed with The Shining, it was about the toils and vigor of a creative life and the dangers of insanity coming out of it, which would really appeal to a college freshman and, shortly after college, a young writer and so forth. But now, as a father with a 4-year-old, I just see it as it's all about Danny and danger, and it's all about the dangers of being a bad father and a lesson to be a good father. And so I just find it's amazing that film can mean so much to me at different times in my life. I think that's the richness of the film.
Well, and certainly, watching it as a kid, I'd be watching through Danny's eyes saying, my world is falling apart around me, and my dad is trying to kill me. And now, as the dad, it's like, oh, I hope I don't kill my family.
Well, I was really interested in one of the theories prior to his making the film, was that he was bored, and this idea that Barry Lyndon is this beautifully costumed, gloriously shot, but very boring film. Do you agree with this?
Well, I love Barry Lyndon, but that scene is about. But at that point in 237, we're watching the film, through this person's eyes, and I have to become the advocate for each of our interviewees. So if he's describing Barry Lyndon as a boring movie, well, let's talk about it as a boring movie. And Barry Lyndon's an amazing movie, and it's a grown-up, and it can take care of itself. But I am very attracted by the idea that The Shining is a film more complicated than a regular movie, and that he was experimenting with sort of radical new storytelling techniques. Talking about Barry Lyndon as a more straightforward production, is a way to get there.
There's this idea of fanaticism. I'm wondering, do you have to fanatically see it, let's say 10, 15 times to get any of this if it isn't told to you, by these people who are positing these theories, do you think?
Well, interestingly, Bill Blakemore, who writes about the genocide of the Native American Indians, claims to have only seen the film 4 times, which I find unbelievable, because the level of detail that he has at his fingertips about that film is just astounding. So he's one of the preeminent scholars on this film. So.
Well, it may be you need to see it multiple times to understand all the references, but even if you don't necessarily understand what's happening with the architecture, that doesn't mean that subconsciously you can't feel slightly disturbed that this movie is taking place within some sort of M.C. Escher-esque impossible labyrinth, and that you don't necessarily, you can't maybe articulate what everything is referenced to, but you feel uneasy and anxious, and the movie is doing its work. And if that motivates you to revisit it, you might begin to start unpacking it. Clearly the movie ends with a puzzle, that black and white photograph with a date at the end. It isn't like the last shot in, I don't know, there's in The Sixth Sense, where you find out, oh, Bruce Willis was a ghost all along. I understand the movie now. That movie ends with a solution. This movie ends with a mystery. So many people are compelled, just because of that, to go back and take another look.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that walks out of the theater after seeing that last shot with like a, whatever that was.
Or even, exactly.
No,
I get it now.
Well, I do actually remember the third time I watched it, the person I was with, they turned to me and they say, Indians.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Wow.
And I started picking up, so I can't boast that I got it on the third view, but it was one word, tipped me off.
And that date is significant in Native American history, but you sort of need to go outside of the text of the movie to do your research. Yeah, I mean, there's, I think some of the ambiguity and mystery within The Shining is what, even if you don't revisit it frequently enough to satisfy yourself that you've come to understand it, it makes it stick with you in a way. It's a puzzle, it's a problem that you keep wanting to work on.
Well, there was something about the documentary itself that disturbed me as well as the film, actually.
Okay.
There's the one scene in which you see a family sitting around the dinner table watching this film, and I just think, what kind of parents in their right mind?
Well, I mean, my parents, in particular, and though I hate to break it to you, that is archival footage of people watching it.
The periods.
Of the period stuff. It isn't as beautiful as it is, in as much as I would like to take credit for having shot it. It's repurposed stuff, but my family would watch it. My mom took me...
that girl was about 6.
Yeah, well, I don't know, when I was 9, I wanted to see Halloween, and my mom didn't want to see it, but she asked a stranger to buy me a ticket and came back and picked me up 2 hours later.
I still think it's a bit of a risk.
I'm with you. My daughter really wants to see our film, and I'm like, it's not going to happen.
So, in all honesty, now, the theories that are out there, you can pick one that you really believe and that you think it has some weight and some substance, and then one maybe that you think, well, there are a couple that I think are pure cockamamie. If I can throw one out there and maybe you can, give me the rebuttal, is there's the guy who talks about the chair is there in one shot and it disappears in the next, and somehow this is a satirical, comedic take on horror movies. No, he didn't convince me.
Jack is sitting, typing at his typewriter, and Wendy comes in and interrupts him while he's working. And in one shot of Jack...
Got a lot written today?
Sitting at the typewriter, a one shot, you look back behind him, and of course you can see very clearly, because Kubrick was the master of depth of field. He kept everything in focus, so he would have lots of space in which to put things that he wanted you to notice. And in the first shot behind Jack sitting at his typewriter, back against a wall behind him, probably 10 or 12 or 15 feet, is a chair. And then there's a switch to a one shot of Wendy saying something.
Hey, the weather forecast said it's going to snow tonight.
And then the camera switches back to Jack, and the chair is gone.
What do you want me to do about it?
And my students and I always have fun with that, saying, well, continuity error? Could be. Or it's not. And the answer, if it's not, or if it was originally and then Kubrick saw it and decided to keep it, is that he's parodying horror films in order to remind you that this isn't just a horror film.
Well, certainly Stanley Kubrick understood enough about film continuity to recognize that the chair wasn't there and to think about the implications thereof. I don't think he was unaware that that those two shots of Jack were different. What his intent was, is certainly up for debate. But I absolutely believe that he noticed it, whether or not he planned it.
But the academic who's talking, he seems to be with his theory there that it's this comment on kind of almost poking fun at horror movies. It seems a bit far-reaching.
Well, it seems actually, I think, very connected to the idea of the impossible geometry of the hotel, that it's haunted in a way that's much subtler than, Amityville Horror, or someplace where you see, things exploding and changing before your eyes. That all those, I think that's sort of the idea about these kind of continuity errors happening. To me, ties in very much to, like, there's a scene where they go into a pantry or a freezer that has only one door, but they exit out a separate door. And I think that, again, his intent is hard to say. I don't know that there's a record of it, but I'm perfectly willing to believe that he was so fluid in talking about in in speaking cinematically and in using film language, that he thought that he'd be playful with it, by deliberately introducing these things that the audience may or may not notice. And absolutely, when we talk about the carpet design, where the toys are on one, that Danny's facing one way in shot A and another one in shot B, well, that's the kind of thing that's more difficult to get wrong than to get right, because you physically have to move them and turn them around 180 degrees. And I've seen continuity photos from the set of The Shining, those Polaroids that the continuity person takes that says the salt and pepper shaker are here on the table and the water is here, so if we all go off to lunch and somebody sneezes and knocks something down, it can be rebuilt exactly as it was before.
Well, thank you both. It's certainly food for thought when we see it on the re-release in October, and we thoroughly enjoyed the film. And like I said before, the timing could not be more perfect. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Matt.
lot.